All right. This looks like it's working. Please let me know if my audio is working fine and everything. I have about an hour because I am on my lunch break, and I like nothing more on my break than work on other things. So let's jump right into it. So quick explanation of what I'm about to do. So in Arcanist, this package that I'm working on to handle multi-step forms, how it works in broad strokes. Oh, let me go into presentation mode. It is literally 12, like 00 when you wrote that comment. I blame the stream delay. Presentation mode. So you can see what I do, and I now have massive text. Okay, so really quickly how Arcanist works is when you create a wizard, like this one. So a wizard has a bunch of metadata, like a title and a slug, and it also contains steps. And a step is basically, well, what it says. It's one step in this multi-step form. And this class right here would translate to this wizard. Quick side note that Arcanist does not come with any front end. It is completely front end agnostic. So it ships with a blade renderer, but you still have to provide the template, right? So this is just a template I whipped up. So you have 3 steps here. And so if I were to, for example, comment out one of those steps, and then I refresh, that step is now gone. Or if I switch the order of the steps around, dear Lord, I'm getting confused. That is reflected here, right? And so each step, let's just pick the first one, enter username. Looks like this. Steps are also very simple. It has, for our purposes right now, it has 2 important parts. It has a view data function, which is, this returns the data that gets passed to the view, right? And the second one is rules. This is just a Laravel validation rule array. And so there's no like field definition here, right? I kind of use this rules definition to know that when you submit this step, these are the fields that you're interested in, right? So I basically extract from the payload after validating, I'll extract this data, and that's what I save, right? And that's how Arcanist kind of keeps track of things. So there were a few interesting things on Twitter when I asked for like interesting examples of multi-step forms, like something that's a bit more interesting than just clicking next, 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 and done. So in this case, if I just I enter my name, and then I can select some things here. You know, this is all the sort of redirecting between steps and keeping track of if a step is completed or not. That's all of that is done by the package, right? When we go back to the wizard, there's no logic in here, but it all happens in this base class. So the thing I'm trying to work out right now is, one of the questions was, what if I have like dependent fields? Like, for example, let's say, as a very dumb example, let's say that the plans that I want to show in this step depend on the username, right? For lack of a better example, it depends on a value from a different step. That in and of itself is very easy to do. It doesn't even need any special additions to the package because you have this view data function. So right now I just hard code the subscriptions, but this is just a function, right? So you can just put a bunch of if statements in here if you want, and return like different data depending on in this case, a request. But also every step has access to the data to all the data that has been saved in the wizard so far of every step, right? So if I want to say that this is supposed to depend on the username that I've selected in the previous step, I could just do, to make this really quick and dirty, I could say if this data, that's how you access your data, and then you provide the field name in this case. So if the username is Kai, then we want to only show the sucker tier plan, right? So let's do this really quickly, just to make a point, and then we'll say it's really only the second one. So subscriptions, and then I do this. So if I refresh and now I go next, I get an error because I messed something up. Subscript, yeah, this is supposed to be another array in here. So now if I refresh, you can see that I get different data, and if I go back and say I am totally not Kai, now I get both again. So the problem now is, like, displaying dynamic data is easy, but what I can now do is, if I see, well, as Kai, I only have this one, I don't like that, so I go back, change my name to totally not Kai, select the free tier, go next, then I go back to the first step. Now I change my name again, don't care about this because I've already selected it, I go to the next step, now I have an invalid state, right? I have now selected something in step 2 that I'm not supposed to be able to select given the data from step 1. So basically, what needs to happen is if I change this field, it would have to invalidate the second step, right? Because the second step depends on this value. And you can kind of take this as far as you want. You could either say like the entire step 2 depends on all of step 1. So if anything in step 1 changes, all of step 2 needs to be invalidated. Or you can get more specific, saying if I change the username field, let's say there's a bunch of fields here, only if I change the username field should it invalidate step 2. Or sort of the most specific would be, if the username field changes, then only this subscription thing needs to be invalidated, not the entire step. So there's like different levels of how finely grained this needs to be. And I think that I definitely need to provide a sort of on a field level, that configuration needs to be done on a field level, because I think it's very bad UX to invalidate the entire second step just because something in step 1 changed, right? And now I have to fill everything in again, even though only part of that form is different now. So I think that's what I want to do. Okay, so yeah, that's basically the problem I'm trying to solve right now. You need to be able to specify dependencies between fields. So I want to take a few notes here. I have not spent a lot of time thinking about this, so this is like my raw process of how I try and figure this out. Usually the way I approach this, especially when writing a package, is I try and think of it from the consumer side of view. So the consumer in this case would be you, dear viewer, so the consumer of the package. How do I want to expose this API to the user of the package? Because right now, again, you don't really have like a field definition. You have this validation rule. And I don't want to spread out like the field definition over a bunch of methods. Right here, you specify the rules, and here you specify dependencies. I'd rather have it be all in one place. So I think what I need to do is something like what Nova does, right? Where you have like field definitions. So you would like have a fluent interface where instead of saying, here are my rules, you would instead say, these are the fields this wouldn't generate any scaffolding, any templates, right? It's still just configuring metadata, but now you have sort of a way to specify any additional data as well. Like this I can more easily extend, and then you might be able to do something like field, I don't know, make, right? And this is the name. And then similar to what Nova does, you could say like rules, which would be this thing. And then this is where you could chain on something like depends on or whatever, right? And then you say, I depend on username. So this is how you would then say, okay, there's a field here in this step that has a dependency on username. So I kind of like this idea, I think. So the first decision I need to make is, should this be depends on, or should this be like invalidates? So invalidates. So is this basically a forward definition, like the inside the username step? I would say, by the way, this username field would invalidate the following fields from future steps, which I find kind of weird. I think it's more natural to say this field has a dependency on this other field, so if this changes, this field needs to be reset. I think the depends on thing is more natural, and this should probably be an array. So I think I'd like to go for something like this. That's the first part. The second part would be, how do I actually hook into, like at what point do I try and figure out if anything changed or if any fields need to be invalidated? Like first of all, what component should be responsible for that? Because the wizard is already getting kind of big. And secondly, what does invalidate actually mean? Because this immediately, to me, brings up another question. This is kind of my problem with this package. Like, it's like, oh, if I do this, then that needs to change. Oh, I should probably take care of this as well. And so, oh, yeah, it just keeps going. Because for me, the question that it brings up, if I go back to step 1, change it and hit next, which step does it take me to? Like, does it immediately jump to the step that was invalidated? Or is it still just the next step? In this case, it would be the same step, but let's assume like step 3 is the one that had a dependency on this step. And now I change this and I click next. Would it navigate me to step 2 or to step 3? And I think I want it to navigate me to the step that just got invalidated. So I need to be able to figure out like what's the step that just got invalidated. And it's possible that there's multiple steps that got invalidated, right? So there's a lot of edge cases, and I'm not going to try and solve all of them at once. So first, I think a good starting point for this would be to make what's currently possible, just like specifying the validation rules. Like take this and make it work with this like new field make syntax. So I'm not even adding the actual feature yet, I'm just making the preparation to like introduce this concept of a field and then make the current implementation work with that. And then I can start extending, adding other properties to this field. I think that's kind of a good way to go. And then I'll solve one problem at a time, because there are quite a lot of details that I have to think through here. But to start, so let's say, I think I'm gonna, oh, this is my demo application, so let me switch to the actual package really quickly. There we go. So I think what I want to do is I'll start with this field class, which is basically just a like a data object, right? It's like a builder pattern that you configure a bunch of values on, because I will need that in the next step. And this is a fairly straightforward thing to implement, I think. So let's just say field test. This can be just a PHP unit test, I think. So I guess the easiest way would be I can create a new field with a name or something like that. So otherwise, the inspections plugin is going to complain if I use this instead of self. So the field's name should be name. If I do field make name. So this is my first test. Freg, I don't know if you're still there, but I'm a big fan of Spazi's PHP unit watcher package, which unfortunately when I start streaming, everything takes 10 times as long, so I can't really use it the way I normally would. So, but I'm still gonna try. So let's do watch field test. So class field doesn't exist, right? Yeah. So let's make that. Does this justify a namespace? Currently it doesn't. So let's just stick it in here. Right, and now if I import it, it's gonna say, come on, no method called make, right? Okay, and so now I'm trying to call the name function on null because this is not actually returning anything. So let's do return yourself. And then make sure this actually has a name. Let's just hard code this for now. So the test is green. Is it not name? It should be name. Right, and now I can start refactoring this. I think I want a private constructor. And this is just a private field, so let's pass this. Why is this called string? This is called name. And then instead of returning this, we do that. Okay. So that was straightforward enough. All right, next thing. I already said I want rules, right? So let's do, it can add validation rules. So again, this is just a data container, so like the validation rules are really just an array. This isn't actually performing the validation. So really all this test is going to be is assert that whatever, when I call like field rules, this is interesting. Let's do a get rules for now, because now I have a conflicting method name. So if I do that, because I want this kind of API where I say rules sort of as a setter, but that means that rules can't also be the getter, right? So I need a different name. Doesn't really matter what it is. It just needs to be the same thing that I pass in here, right? So this is just whatever I pass in. So I guess to make this test pass, I can just kind of cheat to do that. I'll just hard code this. oh, this should be get rules. And then I need rules. And this can just be empty for now. Oh, this needs to be fluent. So okay, so now I need another test to make this fail. So does not have validation rules by default. Does not have. So in case you weren't there yesterday, this is actually how I work. I follow this sort of TDD workflow pretty strictly by kind of hard coding strings just to get the test to pass, and then I'll write another test that forces me to change this. It's usually just like the feedback cycle is a bit quicker because I'm not streaming, so everything's a bit snappier. So basically this test just means if I just do that, this should just be empty. Right, which it now isn't. So now I actually need to make sure that this thing is actually doing anything. So let's keep track of our rules here. And set them. And then instead of hard coding this, where is this array? Okay, so I don't like this rules get rules thing. But what I like even less is kind of overloading this thing by saying, well, if you don't provide a parameter, I will treat that as a getter. I don't like that. Especially since this is really only going to be called by the package itself. So I think I'm okay with that, actually. There also needs to be, oh, I have a getter for name, right? But it bothers me that this is inconsistent. That there's no get name. I think just so it's consistent, I will rename this. Because this is going to keep me up at night. No, if I ever need a function called set something, I have made a mistake somewhere. Like, setters to me are a code smell, just by default. Even though I know like this is a setter, right? I didn't call it that. But in general. Okay, so I think this is really all I need right now, because I just want to reproduce the current functionality. So anything else here? I don't think so. Okay, so now that I have this, let's think about this. So to make the current behavior work, right now what happens is that inside the wizard step, there is a function called process, which gets called by the wizard. And this is what's doing the validation. So here's where I grab the rules. And I think the easiest way to do this is really to just, the rules thing can actually keep existing. I'll just make it private instead of protected, and it's kind of a computed field that takes like the field definitions and spits out the validation array as a result. So I don't actually have to change this part, at least in theory. So let me think. Do I actually have a separate test? I don't have separate test cases for the step yet, because they usually test it sort of indirectly through the wizard. I'm wondering if it's worth doing this here. like writing a separate test. Because really this does not depend on the wizard. So and the wizard steps are kind of a pain to set up because they require quite a bit of context to set up. And since I really only want to test that this throws a validation exception if the request does not have the specified payload. This might actually be easier. Let me double check if I have some form of validation test. Validation, yeah, I do. So technically, this test should be enough. As long as this test keeps passing, because this is an actual integration test, right? This actually does the thing. As long as this test keeps running, I think I'm good. So let's make sure that this test keeps running. So usually I would just watch the entire test file, but because this is going to take forever when I'm streaming, I'll try and scope it just on this one method. I'm not even sure if that works, but I think I can do it rejects an invalid. That should be enough. Yeah, if I actually get the syntax right. Dear Lord, why is Vim so hard? So let's see if that works. Come on. There we go. Okay, so this is now running this test. So now I should be able to, first of all, add this fields method that you're supposed to override, right? And this is supposed to return an array, and by default, it does nothing. It just returns an empty array. And then in my test, I'm going to take this test wizard, and specifically the first step, because this is what this test is using. And I'm just going to define this fields method here. So this is not going to do anything because fields method is not being used. But then I can start refactoring towards using this field method and see that the test still passes. So fields. So this shouldn't have changed anything. And now we can do this. We'll say field make first name. So we just kind of emulate what's defined here in the rules in this new syntax, right? So the rules would be required. And then we want to have another field called last name, which is also required. So test should still be green because this is not even being used. So now let's refactor this part. I guess the easiest way would be to start. Where should I start? Because at the end, this rules method should become private because you don't need it anymore. Like you as in the user of the package, right? This is just an internal thing. But for now, I'm just gonna say, do inline here. And I think you can view this just as a data transformation thing, right? You can say like this fields, and then we'll map over that. And this is going to be a field. No, what I want is a map with keys, because I want an associative array back where the key is the field name. And the rules are field get rules. And I think that should actually work already. And then this needs to be that. So I'm not using this. But now I think I should be able to just, instead of saying this rules, do this instead. And hopefully it still works. Yeah, okay, cool. The problem is I'm pretty sure I've just broken a whole bunch of tests because they don't they don't specify. They haven't really implemented this fields thing yet, and so the entire test still depends on, it still assumes that this rules thing is being used. Let's just check. Just run all tests and then wait 10 minutes for it to finish. I'd be really surprised if no test fails, because the rules are not only used for for validation, but it's also, I kind of take the keys that you define in your rules, I interpret that as these are the fields I actually should save, right? That's the state I need to keep track of. And it might be, let's see. This is really making me skeptical. This either means that some of the tests aren't really that good, or I just don't have a test that actually depends on the specific detail. Let me just quickly look through, because I would have assumed that there's some test that says oh, right, no, right, I remember, because wait, there should be something like saving the data of a step. Is it? There should be something. View data. Handles the form submission. There. Oh, yeah, this one. So let's see. So assuming I currently have this data for my wizard, and then I submit the form with different data, and then I update the step, the data should have changed. And apparently it has. Oh, I know why. I think I know why. I think it's because the wizard is currently. Oh no. Okay, wow. Okay, now I got it. Who wrote this again? I don't know. So here's what's going on. Why this actually works is because I did something right, I guess. So the way the sort of data flow works is when you submit a form, so in this case it has a single field called username, right? In my step class for that step, should I close the repository? But in my step class, I would have a validation rule that says username required, for example, right? Inside this abstract with wizard, there's an update method and there's a store method, depending on if this is the first time you're submitting the wizard or if you're updating an existing wizard. But the part that's relevant here is the same. It calls the step process method. So it delegates to the wizard, it passes in the request. And this process method, we actually just touched, right? Whatever it returns, like it is supposed to return the step result, right? Which is basically, this can be a success or a failure. And if it's a success, it needs to pass along the data that should be saved. And the data that should be saved is, well, validated data. So we didn't actually change anything when it comes to that. We just changed where we get our rules from. Right? Everything below this point basically still works the same way. So I'm actually kind of pleased that I that I separated these things enough so that this change doesn't like cascade all over the place. It's satisfying when that happens, even though it took me a while to figure out. I don't know if this made sense to anyone but me. So in case you don't know, like the validate thing, that comes from this validates requests trait, which you may have already used in some of your controllers, right? And it provides this validate method. And the validate method, the way it works is its return value is the same as like saying request validated if you implement a custom form request, right? It validates the data and then it returns all the data you specified in your rules, which is basically what I'm doing here. And the only thing we changed is how we build up the rules, but the end result is the exact same. So this means, I think, that so if I just say, if I put this inside rules, just so I can actually keep the implementation of this the same as it was before. So rules now simply does what we just did inline. Now things are going to fail because some classes are overriding this method. So for example, in my test case, for example, this one, it overrides the rules method, right? So now that I changed how rules are supposed to behave, okay, in this particular case, it's actually going to end up working because it returns the thing that I expect. Maybe I should just run the test instead of saying stupid things and looking like an idiot. Because this is the only test step that seems to have defined validation rules. Thank God. Yeah. So I should be able to just delete this. And all my tests should still pass. Wait, no. Let's filter on wizard test. So this is really the easy part, right? This is because we're not actually dealing with the whole invalidating fields thing, but I think this is a good step to prepare this feature because now this makes it a lot easier for me to like tack on additional information to this field thing than it was before. So that still works, which means I should now be able to make the rules thing private. So there's a, how does this work? Refactor. Isn't there like a, and then change the visibility. Did that work? Thank God this isn't published yet because this would have been a breaking change. So let's now move this down to where all the other private methods are. Well, I say that, and then there aren't any private methods. Okay. Cool. So everything still works, but I now have this new syntax that I can use. So let's commit that. Let's actually commit the field stuff separately. So, and field test. And so then the rest of this is basically just refactoring the step, right? I always do like the git add patch thing, so I can step through all my changes once again. Because I often catch myself like leaving debug statements in there, for example. And this is like a good step to catch any of those mistakes. Right, so we refactored wizard step to use fields instead. Cool. Okay, so that was the easy bit. Now for the hard bit. How do I actually define these dependencies? Okay, so this is now, again, this is like an API question. How do I want this to work? Like, what are you actually specifying? If in your step you want to say, so go back to this. If in the definition of this step, oh, okay, I just broke my demo application because it's just sim-linked and I'm using the rules thing. So yeah, that just broke. So yeah, if you want to say like the subscription field, the selected subscription depends on the username, how would you want to specify that? Should you provide the step? Like, should you say, I depend on the username field of step 1? Like, is the step even relevant? Because what Arcanist currently does, the data it keeps is just a flat array. It does not scope it to a specific step. So if step 1 and step 2 have a field with the same name, step 2 would actually override that. Currently, I still stand by that design decision. Because I find it's very unlikely that you will have the exact same field name in multiple steps, but if this ever turns out to be a problem, I'm going to have to scope it. The problem is that once you scope it, it affects how you can, it affects how you have to, if you want to do like this data, right? Because it is currently not namespaced, you can just say like username. But as soon as I say, no, I have to namespace it by the step name, you then have to do like, I don't know, step slug dot something, right? So you have to know all of these details about the other steps, and that's what I don't really like. So I would want to avoid having to scope this as long as I can. And I completely forgot where I was going with this. Oh yeah, so do you even need to specify the step? Because if the data isn't scoped, this means that just saying I depend on username would be enough, right? Because you can't have two usernames in a wizard. Just a field name would be unique, which I think is kind of cool, because now that I think about it, like let's just it's like I wonder if autocompletion works in here. Just open a scratch file. So test step extends. Oh shit, this is cool. That actually works. So I just open. Are you serious? Okay. So I know that I need to implement the onComplete method, right? No, not onComplete, is completed, I believe. Is complete. I just want to play around with this, man. Why are you making me do this? Don't care. So let's think about this. Like, assuming I am configuring my my step here, and like I have a field that's just, I don't know, something. It's interesting how you can auto import, but you couldn't like generate the method stubs for some reason. And now I want to say, I don't know, depends on something like this, and then I say username. If I don't specify the field name, so if I don't specify the step here, one cool thing is that is it even a cool thing? In any case, I don't see a reason why the step is necessary here, so I'm going to leave it out for now, because this is enough. Basically, what this would be saying is, right here was where I was going with this. I'm not really saying I depend on step 1. I just say that there's some data in this wizard that this particular field depends on. I don't care in what step it is defined, right? It's just like, if this particular thing changes, I don't know, I don't care where, I don't care how, but if this changes, I need to be invalidated. Right, so completely decoupling it from the step, I think, is kind of cool. So this would still be configuration, right? This wouldn't actually do anything. This would just kind of encode this information that this field has a dependency, and then some other thing that I have yet to write actually has to use this information to determine if this field needs to be invalidated. So I think, yeah, the next easiest step would be to just extend the field class so I can actually specify this. It can define dependencies. I guess a better first test would be it does not have dependencies by default. Does not have. Right, which is just assert empty when I say field get dependencies. I don't know what it is with my packages that I always end up with, like, having to deal with dependencies. First venture, now this. Right, so I have a field, and by default it doesn't have any dependencies. Let's see. So, no method get dependencies, right? Yeah. I said this yesterday in a stream, but when you do TDD, it is a good idea to actually think about what the error is going to be, like the test error is going to be. Like in my case, right? Before I hit save, in my head I went, okay, the error should be that this method doesn't exist on this field. Because if you continually get surprised by what the error is, you don't actually understand your code, right? That is a bad sign. Oh yeah, because it implicitly returns null. Oh, assert empty is true for null. I don't like that. No, I don't like that. Let's do assert count. Null needs to die in a fire. Must be accountable, right? So now I at least have to return something that can be counted, because I want this to always return an array. Because null is a plague. And now we can specify dependencies. Dependencies. So, depends on, what do I want this to be called? I think this reads kind of nice. Field depends on. And then let's actually make this a variadic argument, so you don't have to explicitly provide the brackets. So let's do this. So if I do that, I should get back an array. with these two fields. Right, so no method depends on. Right, so let's do field names. Or is it just, I think it's just fields. It's more consistent. Then let's keep track of the dependencies here. Dependencies. And so what this does is it sets the dependencies. And it should be fluent. And then this needs to return the dependencies, and that should work. Yeah. Okay, so now we can actually configure this, but it's not doing anything. I've been streaming for 50 minutes, so I don't have time to really start on the interesting bit. But I think I've laid the groundwork now, so to configure dependencies on a field. Okay, so I don't have enough time to really start working on anything interesting, but I can think through what the next steps are going to be. So one thing that I just kind of thought of, because I haven't yet defined what invalidate even means. I think invalidate just means you delete this key from the data array. You could just unset it. Because I think what is going to happen if I do this, and this comes back to the question of where do I redirect to if something I did invalidates some other step. One cool thing is that every step, as you might have seen in this like Scratch thing that I did, you have to implement this method. This is complete method. Because this gets passed to your views, so you can like render your completed steps in a different color or whatever. And I'm pretty confident that in 99% of the cases, this is just going to be some variation of this data, some field, like is not null. Like it's set, right? Because I have validation, so I know that if it exists, it is valid. So I can just check that, like all the fields, do all the fields exist? Sorry, does the data for all fields exist that this step kind of thinks of as mandatory, right? So if I invalidate a step, and invalidate means I simply delete this key, this would automatically change the step to no longer be complete. I just kind of get that for free. Which I think is kind of cool. I really like it when like decisions I have made a long time ago, like months later, turn out to make something else just basically free, right? In this case, this whole invalidating a step. Oh yeah, okay. It goes even further than I thought. Not only would this mean the step is automatically considered incomplete, right? Because of how it is connected to the data of the wizard. Also, the package has you can resume a wizard, right? So if I unfortunately I broke this. Okay, so I just can't click anything. I have the cached version. You can see right up here, it says like wizard register some ID, right? So this is actually stored in the database currently, which means if I were to just call the wizard with the ID, but I don't specify a step, it will automatically navigate to the first step that isn't complete yet, right? So you can resume where you left off. The cool thing is, I think I can just change the entire redirect behavior to always work like that. Like always navigate to the first uncompleted step. Oh, sorry, incomplete step. Because currently if I hit next, it'll just like navigate to the step with the next ID, basically, with the next index. So in the wizard, when I say update, down here it says like redirect to next step, and next step is literally just like from my array of steps, like take the one with the index one greater than my current step. So I explicitly always go to the next step. I think I can actually change this behavior to always redirect to the first incomplete step. Because in most cases, this will actually be equivalent, right? If I am on step 1 and I hit next, the next incomplete step would be step 2, which is where I want to go anyways. So it would be the same. But it would also mean if I'm on step 1 and step 2 is completed, so I went back, right? And I changed something on step 1 that would invalidate something on step 3. It would now automatically redirect to step 3 because step 3 has now become incomplete. Right? Because of this whole thing. So I think I just get everything more or less for free. The biggest challenge is kind of actually figuring out that something changed that some step depends on. I think that is the really difficult thing here. Like once I have that information and I know, oh, hey, by the way, username changed, and this step depends on that, I think that's when it becomes easy, but actually figuring out like, okay, what data needs to be invalidated? Because I have to kind of look through all the steps, get all the dependencies, and see if during this request one of those fields was changed. That's kind of the tricky bit that I don't know yet where to put. So these would be the next steps, no pun intended, for implementing this feature. And maybe I'll do that this evening, and I'll maybe stream it, because I think this is interesting. But it's kind of cool how this is all coming together. Like this seemed like a very intimidating feature to me. But because of how all of this is connected, I get so many things just for free, basically. And I think this is also a much nicer API than just specifying validation rules, and they're also being used as the fields that I want to save. It felt kind of weird. And this is familiar to anyone who's used Nova before, so I think this is a good change. Right, so let me just write down my thoughts. So invalidating a step means unsetting its data. Yeah, whatever, I know what I mean. This automatic, I hate this word, automatically make the step incomplete. That is assuming it is part of your is complete function. Change redirect flow to always redirect to next incomplete step. And then, so these are like the easy wins. And then the next thing is figure out a way to check if any fields need to be invalidated. based on the current request. And that is really the core issue. Right. So it has been exactly 1 hour. I need to get back to work. Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm going to stream tonight. I might actually. I'll just post it on Twitter in case I do. This breaks down in case you have Prev. How does it break down? Because I don't really see. I'm specifically talking about once you submit a form, right? If you explicitly want to like navigate to the previous step, that's like a different thing. It's really what happens after the form submission. Should be predictable. Yeah, I see what you mean. I think I have to think this through a bit more. Because currently, but that's kind of a front-end issue. That's not really related to the package. But if I like go back to a step I have already completed, there's no way to like go to the next step without submitting the form again, which is not something I might want to do because maybe I have entered like a password before, right? So maybe there should be like a next and a update kind of thing. So yeah. Yeah, I think this requires a bit more thought, but it's a good point. This is like a fine balance that I have to find between how much of the behavior does the package actually force on you, right? And how much do you have to kind of wire up manually? Because I like the idea that for like most forms, the default behavior is going to be fine, right? And in these cases, I don't want the user to have to implement the same like forwards, backwards, next step thing every single time. But there should also be like a way for when you need a different behavior where you can hook in, which is kind of the story of this whole package. Like sensible default, but it needs to be configurable. Oh well, that is a problem for future Kai, which means like in 6 hours Kai. Anyways, thanks for watching, and maybe I'll see you around next time. Have a good one. Bye-bye.